I've always been the kind of guy who believes in giving people the benefit of the doubt. You know the type: calm, collected, reasonable. I don't jump to conclusions or let wild thoughts run away with me. But lately, something's been gnawing at me, and the source of that itch was my wife, Kate. We've been married for 5 years, and while we weren't exactly the poster couple for romance, things had been solid between us. At least, I thought they were. Then, she got this new job about 6 months ago, working for some hotshot named Richard. I remember when she first told me about him. Her eyes lit up as she described him: tall, successful, with just the right amount of confidence. Of course, at the time, I brushed it off. Everyone talks about their new boss when they start a job. But as time went on, something about the way she talked about Richard just didn't sit right. It wasn't just that she mentioned him more than usual. It was the way she'd glance at her phone, smile at his texts, or laugh at some inside joke she never bothered to explain. It started small. She began staying late at work more often, sometimes with the excuse of a team meeting, or urgent project deadlines. Okay, fair enough, I am not the guy who tells his wife she can't have a career. Then came the phone calls. She'd step out of the room when her phone rang, and whenever I asked who it was, I'd get some vague answer about work. And then there was her appearance. Kate's always been a sharp dresser, but lately it's like she stepped up her game for no reason. New clothes, more makeup, a sudden obsession with hitting the gym after work. It felt like she was preparing for something, or worse, someone. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. I'd sit there on the couch, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I mean, we'd had our ups and downs before, but this felt different. I'd never had that sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach before. The kind you get when you know something is off but you don't have the proof yet. Then, one evening, everything came into sharp focus. Kate was in the shower, and I was sitting on the bed, scrolling through my phone when her phone buzzed. It was one of those cheap little thrills you get when someone's phone goes off near you. Your mind automatically tells you to glance at the screen. I wish I hadn't. A message popped up, and it wasn't the content that caught my attention. It was who it was from: Richard. Not Richard from work, or Boss Richard. Just Richard. No last name, no context. Just his name and a message that read, "Had a great time today. Same place tomorrow?" My heart did that uncomfortable thing where it skips a beat, but not in a good way. In that moment, everything I'd been trying to ignore, every red flag, every suspicious little moment, suddenly felt like a puzzle I'd been avoiding finishing. And now I had the final piece. But here's the thing: I didn't confront her. At least, not right away. The old me, the guy who used to think everything was chill, probably would have burst into the bathroom, demanding an explanation. But this new, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach version of me took a different route. I decided to play it cool. Or at least, what I thought was cool. When Kate came out of the bathroom, I handed her phone back casually, like nothing had happened. I smiled and asked about her day. She smiled back, a little too wide, and I couldn't help but notice the way her eyes darted to her phone when it was back in her hands. That was the moment I knew I needed a plan. Now, I've seen enough movies to know how these things usually go down. The guy follows his wife, catches her in the act, maybe hires a private investigator, or worse, ends up in a fistfight with the other guy. But that wasn't me. I didn't want some cliché, gotcha moment where I burst in on them mid-affair. No, I wanted something better. I wanted to catch them in a way that left no room for doubt, no excuses, and most importantly, no escape. So, I started doing my homework. I didn't hire anyone, but I did a little light detective work of my own. I wasn't just going to wait for the next suspicious text to land on her phone. I wanted to know more about this Richard guy. Kate had told me a bit about him: wealthy, handsome, the kind of boss who threw around compliments like confetti. The type that probably thought of himself as a mentor, but was really just a guy who liked to use his position to get what he wanted. What I needed was to figure out how serious this thing was, or if it was just some casual flirtation between the two of them. I wasn't going to assume the worst ** yet star. But I was getting there. Over the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I didn't act suspicious or change anything about my routine. Kate continued with her late-night work meetings, and I made sure to be extra supportive, the model husband. "Oh, you've got another late night?" I'd say, keeping my tone light. "No problem, I'll grab dinner with Tom. You've got to get that promotion, right?" Little did she know, while she was out doing whatever it was she was doing with Richard, I was getting closer to the truth. I started following her patterns: what time she left, when she'd come home, and how long those mysterious meetings really lasted. I kept mental notes, cross-referencing her behavior with the occasional slip-up in her stories. Then one night I got my first real break. Kate was working late again, but when I casually checked her social media, I noticed she wasn't anywhere near the office. One of her friends had posted a photo of a restaurant downtown, and there she was, Kate, in the background, laughing at a table with someone who sure looked a hell of a lot like Richard. I didn't explode. Instead, I saved the photo and quietly closed my laptop, my mind already formulating the next phase of my plan. Confronting her right now wouldn't do me any good. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. I wasn't going to be that guy who got half the story and then blew up his life. No, I was going to get the whole truth, and I was going to do it on my terms. I started thinking about how I could use her own behavior against her. Kate had always been a bit of a gossip. She loved hearing stories about other people's drama, the juicier the better. And if there was one thing she couldn't resist, it was a good scandal. That's when the idea hit me. I didn't need to catch her in the act, I needed to make her think she was the one slipping up. That's when the real planning began. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to set a trap, one so clever that by the time she realized what was happening, it would already be too late. It's funny how once you decide on revenge, you get a kind of clarity. Everything Kate did started to make sense now. The little lies, the way she acted distant one minute and overly affectionate the next. She thought she was playing me, keeping her little affair under wraps. But what she didn't know was that I was already 10 steps ahead. I could have confronted her that night, could have told her I knew about Richard, the late nights, the phone calls. But where's the fun in that? No, I wanted her to think she had the upper hand, all while I tightened the noose around her carefully constructed lie. She had no idea what was coming, and that was the best part. As I lay there in bed that night, watching her sleep, I couldn't help but smile. This was going to be good. Chapter 2: The Perfect Bait. It all started with a lie. A simple, harmless one, but a lie nonetheless. I told Kate I was going out of town for a work trip, just a quick weekend away for a client meeting in Chicago. The truth? There was no trip. No meetings. No Chicago. In fact, my biggest client at work barely knew I existed. But Kate didn't need to know that. What she did need to know, or at least believe, was that I was going to be out of the picture for the weekend. That was important for phase 2 of my plan. See, I knew if I gave her what seemed like a free pass, she'd take the bait. If she was going to sneak around with Richard, the opportunity couldn't get any juicier than me being out of town for 48 hours. I packed a suitcase, made a big deal about it, kissed her goodbye, and even texted her when I got to the airport. She replied, all smiles and heart emojis, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of it. She had no idea. Now, I wasn't going to sit idly by during my trip. No, I had work to do. After I left, I set up shop at a friend's place across town. Tom's a good guy, one of the few people who knew what I was planning. I told him everything, from my suspicions to the plan I was concocting, and to his credit, he didn't try to talk me out of it. In fact, I think he might have enjoyed the whole thing a little too much. "You're really going all out, aren't you?" Tom asked as I settled into his living room with my laptop. "Oh, you have no idea," I said, cracking my knuckles in anticipation. "This is just the beginning." The plan was pretty straightforward, really. I wasn't going to tail Kate like some private eye, peeking through bushes or following her car. That was amateur hour. Instead, I decided to use a little digital sleight of hand. Kate was the type who trusted technology a little too much. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, and she loved her apps, social media, and most importantly her text messages. I'd already taken care of the technical side of things a few weeks ago, quietly installing a piece of software on her phone that allowed me to see her messages in real time. She didn't have a clue. As long as I didn't do anything too obvious, she'd never know I was watching. And now, I was watching. After I landed in Chicago, according to the texts I sent her, I started monitoring her phone more closely than ever. It didn't take long for things to get interesting. Barely 2 hours after I supposedly left town, a message from Richard popped up on her phone. "Hey, you free tonight? Dinner at our spot?" I smiled. Our spot. Nice touch, Richard. Real original. Kate replied almost immediately. "I thought you'd never ask. Greg's out of town, so I'm totally free. 7:30? That was all I needed to see. Hook, line, and sinker. Now, I wasn't just going to sit back and let this dinner happen without some form of intervention. No, that wouldn't be nearly as satisfying. I had to do more. Much more. That's where Phase 3 came into play, the online persona. See, one thing I knew about Kate was her love for gossip. She had this circle of friends, let's call them the Wine Club, who thrived on juicy stories about other people's misfortunes. They'd meet every Thursday night to drink wine, talk about their husbands, their jobs, and whatever scandalous news they could get their hands on. Kate always said it was harmless fun, just girl talk. But I knew better. They lived for this stuff. So, I decided to give them something to talk about. I created a fake profile on one of those anonymous gossip forums, the kind where people air out dirty laundry without any fear of getting caught. My persona was simple. I was a disgruntled ex-employee of Richard's. I wrote up a post claiming that Richard had been sleeping with multiple women at the office, promising them promotions in exchange for, well, you know. I didn't mention Kate by name, no need to blow the lid off just yet, but I made it clear that Richard was a serial cheater. And because I knew Kate and her friends followed this kind of gossip religiously, I made sure the post would show up in all the right places. It didn't take long for the bait to be bitten. 2 hours after I posted it, Kate's phone buzzed with a message from one of her wine club friends. "OMG, have you seen this? Looks like your boss is a bit of a player." Kate's reply made me grin. "What? Send me the link." A few minutes later, she was all over the post. I could almost picture her eyes widening as she read through the fabricated story about Richard's extracurricular activities. Her response? Even better than I'd hoped. "Wow, I had no idea he was like that. Thanks for letting me know. We're just having dinner tonight to talk about work stuff, but I'll be careful." Right. Just dinner. Sure, Kate. Now, this is where things started to get really fun. With Kate already on edge about Richard, I decided to push things a little further. I used a burner phone to send her an anonymous text, posing as someone from her office. "Be careful around Richard. You're not the first woman he's done this with." I knew she wouldn't ignore that. Kate had a guilty conscience, and it didn't take much to set it off. Sure enough, a few minutes later, I saw her reply. "Who is this? What do you mean?" No need to respond. I'd already planted the seed. Now, it was just a matter of watching it grow. By the time Kate met up with Richard for dinner that night, she was on high alert. I knew because I was watching their conversation unfold in real time through her text messages. Apparently, she'd decided to confront him about the rumors during their meal. "So, I saw something online about you today," Kate texted him, likely while pretending to be busy with her salad or whatever they were eating. "What do you mean?" Richard replied. "Some ex-employee of yours posted about you sleeping with women at the office, offering them promotions in exchange. Is that true?" I nearly laughed out loud when I saw that. Richard had no idea what was coming. I could practically hear the panic in his next message. "No! That's crazy. Don't believe everything you read online. People make up stuff all the time." Of course, he would say that. But the damage was done. I could tell from Kate's curt replies that she wasn't entirely convinced by his denial. She still went through with dinner, though probably to keep up appearances. But I knew her. Once that doubt was in her mind, it wouldn't go away. That was Phase 3. The real piece de resistance was Phase 4, and it came the following day. Remember how I said I wasn't going to follow Kate around? Well, that wasn't entirely true. I wasn't going to do it myself, but I did hire a guy for the job. Nothing too invasive, just enough to get some photographic evidence if things went south. And things definitely went south. While I was in Chicago, my guy followed Kate and Richard from dinner to a hotel downtown. Classic. I didn't need photos of them checking in to know what was going on, but hey, a little visual proof never hurt anyone. The best part? I wasn't even planning to use them. Not yet, anyway. That was for the grand finale. With all the pieces in place, I sat back and waited for the inevitable. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, while I was on my flight back home, Kate sent a flurry of panicked texts to her wine club friends. Apparently, the rumors about Richard had spread like wildfire, and now the whole office was buzzing with gossip about his inappropriate behavior. Even worse, it seemed like someone had tipped off HR about the affairs. I wonder who that could have been. By the time I got home, Kate was a mess. She greeted me with a half-hearted hug and barely made eye contact. I could tell she was distracted, her mind racing with thoughts of Richard, the rumors, and probably that anonymous text from the night before. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Yeah, just work stuff," she mumbled, forcing a smile. "Right. Just work stuff. Sure, Kate." That night, after she went to bed, I did one final check of her messages. Richard had texted her, asking her to meet again the next day to clear the air. She hadn't replied yet, probably because she didn't know what to believe anymore. That's what I wanted: doubt, confusion, a sense that her world was starting to unravel. I could have ended it all right then and there. I had the proof. I had the hotel photos. I had the texts. But that wouldn't be nearly as satisfying as what I had in mind for the final act. Because this wasn't just about catching Kate in the act. It was about making sure she and Richard would never forget the consequences of their actions. And believe me, they wouldn't. Not when I was done with them. Chapter 3: The Trap is Set. It's funny how, once you start playing this kind of game, you realize just how easily people walk right into your traps. All it took was a few carefully placed rumors, a fake work trip, and a sprinkle of doubt. Suddenly, Kate and Richard thought they were untouchable, free to meet whenever and wherever without the pesky inconvenience of a husband in the way. And that's exactly where I wanted them. After my little Chicago adventure, I made sure to keep up appearances at home. Kate was more distracted than ever, walking around with her phone glued to her hand, glancing at it every few minutes like she was waiting for a bomb to go off. In a way, she was. I'd planted the fuse, and I could almost see the panic building inside her. But she still didn't have any idea that the explosion would come from me. She thought she was getting away with it. And that was the best part. So, I let things simmer for a few days. Gave her just enough space to believe that everything was fine, that the little hiccup with Richard was just an office rumor that would blow over. And Richard? Well, he was trying his best to play it cool too. They had stopped texting so frequently, probably thinking that keeping a lower profile would help the situation blow over. But Richard wasn't as smart as he thought. He didn't know he was playing in my web, and I was about to tighten the threads. The timing was perfect. Kate had a big presentation coming up at work that week, and she'd been talking about it for days. It was the kind of opportunity that could earn her a promotion, she said. A raise, more responsibility, a bigger office, all the things she'd always dreamed about. And naturally, the final prep meeting was with none other than Richard. The setup was perfect. I needed to make sure that the moment of truth came at the peak of her professional ambitions, when she'd be least expecting a catastrophe to strike. After all, when you're riding high, that's when the fall hits the hardest. And fall she would. I began to orchestrate the final phase of my plan, and it started with another text. This one wasn't anonymous, it came from a fake email address I'd created under the guise of a media outlet. I sent it to Richard's company's HR department, making sure to keep it vague but juicy enough to stir some real interest. The email claimed to have damning evidence of an inappropriate relationship between Richard and a subordinate. I attached a few of the photos my PI had taken of Richard and Kate entering the hotel and, just for good measure, threw in some fake messages I doctored up to make it look like Kate was receiving more than just professional favors from Richard. I knew HR would act quickly, they had to. A CEO embroiled in a scandal like that? Their company's reputation was on the line, and there's nothing corporations hate more than a scandal. I didn't have to wait long before things started to unravel. The day of Kate's big presentation, I made sure to be out of the house early, leaving her to her morning routine. She seemed extra jittery, but I didn't ask why. I just kissed her on the cheek, told her to knock him dead, and headed out, leaving her none the wiser. But I wasn't going far. While Kate was at work, I parked myself at a coffee shop a few blocks away, laptop open, watching the chaos unfold in real time. At around 9 a.m., just as Kate was getting into the office, I got an alert. One of the anonymous tips I'd sent to the media had been picked up by a local business news website. They ran a small piece speculating about a potential sexual misconduct scandal involving Richard and a junior employee. No names were mentioned yet, but the wheels were turning. I could already picture the whispers starting in the office, the side-eye glances, the not-so-subtle clicks of people checking the article on their phones. Richard, being the narcissistic CEO he was, probably assumed he could weather the storm. Maybe he even thought Kate would have his back. That's where things got interesting. Around noon, I received another update, this time from my PI. He had followed Richard from his office to a hotel, yes, again, and this time, Kate was with him. They had decided to skip out on the rest of the day, it seemed, maybe thinking they could ride out the storm in private. Perfect. Now it was time to really set the trap. I pulled out my burner phone and sent Richard a message. I'd been holding on to this for a while, posing as yet another anonymous tipster, and I was about to drop the bomb. The text read, "You've been caught. I have evidence of your affair with Kate, and unless you want this to go public, you'll meet me tonight at 8 p.m. in the bar of the Midtown Hotel. Come alone." I smiled to myself as I hit send. Of course, I had no intention of meeting him. This wasn't about money or blackmail, it was about making sure Richard's world imploded in front of everyone, especially Kate. I wanted him paranoid, rattled, desperate. And when people are desperate, they do stupid things. Richard replied within minutes. "Who is this? What do you want?" I didn't answer. Let him stew. As the afternoon dragged on, I kept tabs on both of them. Kate texted me around 2 p.m., saying her presentation had been postponed due to some office drama, but she didn't go into detail. I knew exactly why it had been postponed, but I played dumb, sending her a supportive, "Don't worry, babe, you'll get him next time." Meanwhile, Richard was spiraling. I saw his messages to Kate grow more frantic as the afternoon wore on. He asked her if she'd heard anything about the rumors spreading through the office. She hadn't, but that didn't stop him from texting her repeatedly, telling her to lay low and keep a low profile for a while. Low profile? Yeah, good luck with that, Richie. By 5 p.m., Richard was a nervous wreck. I could feel it through the string of increasingly erratic messages he was sending. He was convinced someone had it out for him, he just didn't know who. I spent the next hour setting up the final piece of the puzzle. I made a few calls to a certain local news station that loved nothing more than a juicy scandal. I tipped them off, feeding them just enough information about Richard's hotel rendezvous that they couldn't resist sending a reporter to investigate. By 7:30 p.m., I knew Richard and Kate would be settling in at the Midtown Hotel bar, thinking they had a few hours to sort things out before the world came crashing down. Little did they know, the crash was going to happen much sooner than they expected. At precisely 8 p.m., I got a notification that my PI had arrived at the hotel, along with a few local journalists, cameras in tow. They weren't there to report on the story just yet, they were there to observe. To wait for the right moment. And that moment came at 8:15, when Richard, after receiving no response from my fake blackmail message, finally broke and confessed everything to Kate. Apparently, the pressure of the situation had become too much for him, and he thought the only way out was to come clean. He told her about the other women in the office, how it had all started long before she ever came along. He even admitted to sleeping with at least 2 others while they were in the middle of their relationship. I know all this because, unbeknownst to either of them, I had another card up my sleeve, a hidden camera planted in the private room they'd booked at the hotel. The footage streamed directly to my laptop, and I watched it all unfold, sipping my coffee and feeling that sweet, sweet rush of victory. Kate's reaction? Priceless. She went from shock to disbelief to pure, unfiltered rage in about 3 seconds flat. She threw her drink in his face and stormed out, leaving Richard sitting there like a soggy idiot, trying to mop his face with a napkin. But it wasn't over yet. No, I wasn't going to let Kate slink away in anger and leave Richard to deal with the fallout alone. I wanted her to get a front-row seat to the full show. So, as she made her dramatic exit, the journalists moved in, cameras rolling, and confronted Richard right there in the hotel bar. Richard's face turned as white as the napkin he was holding. He stammered, tried to deny it, but the reporters had their facts thanks to my carefully timed tips, and they weren't going to let him wriggle out of it. They hounded him with questions about the affair, the allegations of misconduct at the office, and of course, the recent rumors about his inappropriate relationships with female employees. Kate hadn't made it far before she heard the commotion. She stopped just outside the bar, her curiosity getting the better of her. And there she was, front and center as the whole scene unraveled in front of the cameras. She watched as Richard flailed and failed to defend himself, the weight of his lies crashing down on him in real time. His reputation? Destroyed. His career? Over. Kate didn't move for a solid minute, just stood there, frozen, taking it all in. And that's when she saw me. I'd been standing in the corner of the hotel lobby, out of sight but not far from the action. I caught her eye, gave her a little wave, and winked. The look on her face when she realized what I'd done was priceless. A mix of horror, anger, and disbelief. She knew I'd orchestrated the whole thing. But what could she say? What could she do? I walked out of the hotel without a word, leaving her standing there, watching as the life she'd built with Richard crumbled before her eyes. She had no idea that the next phase was coming. Chapter 4: The Fallout. The moment I walked out of the hotel, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from resolution, mind you, but the kind of peace you feel when you've just completed a beautifully orchestrated masterpiece. And that's what it was, a masterpiece of carefully planned, righteous vengeance. Now, I didn't expect things to fall apart overnight. Life rarely gives you that kind of instant satisfaction. No, I knew that this would take some time to unravel completely. But from what I'd seen at the hotel, the wheels were already in motion. The next morning, I decided to act like nothing had happened. That was part of the plan, too. Kate came home late that night after I had already gone to bed, no doubt thinking through everything that had happened with Richard. I knew she wouldn't be able to sleep, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of confrontation just yet. When I got up the next morning, I made breakfast like it was any other Saturday: eggs, toast, the works. Kate dragged herself into the kitchen looking like she hadn't slept in a week. Dark circles under her eyes, hair in a messy bun, and that haunted look of someone whose world had just been flipped upside down. "Morning," I said, flipping an omelette onto a plate like I hadn't just destroyed her life the night before. "Morning," she mumbled, not making eye contact. She slumped into a chair, poking at her toast like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. I waited a beat, then asked, "Everything okay? You look exhausted." Kate blinked up at me, clearly taken off guard by how normal I was acting. "Yeah, it's just work stuff. Things got a little crazy yesterday." "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow, playing dumb. "Crazy how?" She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "It's Richard. There were some rumors going around, and, well, it all blew up. He's in a lot of trouble." I feigned concern. "Oh, that's too bad. He seemed like a decent guy. What happened?" Kate bit her lip, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She clearly didn't want to tell me the whole truth. "I don't know all the details," she said, her voice shaky. "But HR got involved, and there were reporters outside his office. It's bad." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Well, that's tough. I'm sure things will work out, though." She forced a weak smile. "Yeah, I hope so." But we both knew the truth: things weren't going to work out. Not for Richard, and definitely not for her. The next few days were pure chaos for Kate. I watched from the sidelines as her carefully constructed facade started to crumble. She didn't say much to me, but I didn't need her to. The tension was palpable. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. Every time she walked into a room, she avoided my gaze. She knew. She knew I was playing the long game, and she had no idea how to stop it. Richard, on the other hand, was completely screwed. I kept an eye on the local news, and sure enough, the story about his office affairs had gone public. His company released a statement about taking the allegations seriously and launching an internal investigation. We all knew what that meant. Richard was finished. The media was having a field day, and every detail of his sleazy behavior was being dissected in the court of public opinion. His reputation, his career, his little power trips gone, just like that. And Kate? Well, she was about to realize just how deep this betrayal ran. A few days after the media circus began, I decided it was time to confront her on my terms, of course. I came home from work early and found her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone like it was a ticking time bomb. Her face was pale, and she looked like she hadn't showered in days. "Kate," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up at me, eyes wide and nervous. "Greg," she started, her voice cracking. "I need to tell you something." I raised a hand, cutting her off. "No, you don't. I already know." She blinked, confusion and fear flickering across her face. "What do you mean, you know?" "I know about Richard. I know about the affair. I know about the hotel. I know everything. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked like she wanted to deny it, but she knew it would be useless. Instead, she started to cry. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I didn't mean for it to happen, Save it, I interrupted, my voice cold. I don't want your apologies. I want you to understand what you've done. You threw away our marriage for that slime ball. You lied to me, over and over. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? Kate's sobs grew louder, but I wasn't done. I knew something was going on from the moment you started acting weird. You thought I was oblivious, that I wouldn't notice, but I did. And instead of confronting you, I gave you enough rope to hang yourself. And you did. She was shaking now, her face buried in her hands. Greg, please, No, I said, my voice sharp. This isn't something you can beg your way out of. It's done. Richard's life is in ruins, and so is yours. You're going to lose everything, your job, your reputation, everything you worked for. Was it worth it? Was he worth it? Kate didn't answer. She just sat there, sobbing uncontrollably. I'll be filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. And trust me, I have more than enough evidence to make sure I come out of this with everything. You'll be lucky if you walk away with the clothes on your back. She looked up at me, eyes red and puffy. Greg, don't do this. Please. I stared at her, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. You did this, Kate. Not me. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to wallow in the mess she made. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and more fallout from the Richard scandal. Kate's name wasn't dragged through the mud publicly, but the whispers at her office were enough to do the damage. She resigned quietly, trying to avoid further embarrassment, but it was too late. Her career, much like Richard's, was effectively over. As for Richard, well, he wasn't so lucky. His company officially fired him after the internal investigation concluded, and the media kept hammering away at his reputation. The last I heard, he'd left town in disgrace, probably looking for a fresh start somewhere far, far away. Good riddance. The divorce was quick, cleaner than I expected, and I came out of it in a much better position than Kate. Thanks to the documentation I'd collected, the infidelity clause kicked in, and I walked away with the house, the car, and the bulk of our savings. Kate, on the other hand, was left scrambling to figure out her next move. I didn't care. It wasn't my problem anymore. In the end, I wasn't bitter. I didn't feel rage or regret, or even sadness. What I felt was a strange, quiet sense of closure. I had played the long game, and I had won. A few days after the divorce was finalized, I left a note on Kate's old dresser, just a small parting gift. It wasn't long, just a simple message. I knew all along. Next time, don't underestimate me. And with that, I walked out of the house we had shared, leaving behind the life I thought we'd built together. It was time for a fresh start, and I was more than ready for it. As for Kate, well, she'd just have to live with the wreckage she created.